The F-82 Twin Mustang looked like somebody welded two P-51s together and forgot to explain why. That's essentially what North American aviation did in 1945, when they realized long-range bomber escorts needed a second crew member, but nobody wanted to redesign cockpit layouts. Take two fuselages. Connect them with a reinforced center wing and horizontal stabilizers. Put the pilot in the left cockpit and the radar operator in the right. The result resembled a mistake. The Air Force ordered 500 in 1946. By 1948, they'd canceled most of the contract because jets were the future, and the Twin Mustang was already obsolete before production finished. Propeller fighters belonged in the previous war. The 270 aircraft that did get built went to Air Defense Command for night interception duties nobody expected to matter. Defending American airspace against Soviet bombers was theoretical. Korea was supposed to stay quiet. June 25, 1950 eliminated that theory. When North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel, the Air Force had exactly one night fighter squadron in theater. The 68th Fighter Squadron all-weather flying F-82s out of Japan. Everything else was F-80 jets optimized for daylight ground attack or F-51s left over from World War II. Neither could fight at night with any effectiveness. The Twin Mustang became critical by default. The aircraft's ugliness was tactical. Twin fuselages meant redundancy. Lose an engine and you still flew home. The center wing section housed 650 caliber machine guns with 400 rounds per gun. Some F-82s carried underwing pods with additional 50s. The radar operator in the right cockpit managed the SCR-720 search radar, which could detect aircraft at 10 miles under perfect conditions. Conditions were never perfect. Maximum speed 460 miles per hour. Service ceiling 38,900 feet. Range 2,240 miles with drop tanks. The performance numbers weren't impressive compared to jets, but the F-82 could loiter for hours at low altitude, where jets burned through fuel in minutes. Night interdiction required patience. You flew search patterns in darkness, waiting for radar contact or visual identification of vehicle lights on roads below. Boring work until it wasn't. The 68th Fighter Squadron had 12 operational F-82s when the war started. Not enough. 5th Air Force scrambled to move more aircraft and crews from stateside Air Defense Command units. The Twin Mustang nobody wanted became the only platform capable of stopping North Korean supply convoys and preventing their Air Force from operating after sunset. Pilots called it the Twin, and opinions varied on whether that was affectionate or resigned. Some crews loved the redundancy and firepower. Others hated the asymmetric handling when one engine failed or the way the aircraft mushed through turns because of the extra weight and drag from the second fuselage. Fighter pilots prefer aircraft that feel responsive. The F-82 felt like flying a truck, an effective truck. Still a truck. By late June, the 68th was flying round-the-clock missions trying to locate North Korean aircraft before they could attack retreating American and South Korean forces. Intelligence reports indicated the North had Yak-9s and IL-10s operating from airfields near Pyongyang. Propeller-driven ground attack aircraft, vulnerable if you could find them. At night, that was harder than it sounds. William Hudson checked his oxygen connection at 2:45 hours on June 27, 1950. His radar operator, Carl Fraser, was running through the SCR-720 calibration sequence in the right cockpit. Below them, the Sea of Japan looked black. No moon. Overcast at 8,000 feet. Perfect conditions for something trying to hide. The mission brief at Itazuki Air Base had been simple. North Korean aircraft were staging from Kimpo Airfield near Seoul, recently captured, and using darkness to move supplies south. Find them. Kill them. Hudson's F-82 carried full ammunition and two 165-gallon drop tanks, enough fuel for 4 hours of patrol. They launched at 2:30 hours and climbed to 7,000 feet, heading northwest toward the Korean coast. Fraser called out contacts twice in the first hour. Both were friendlies. American C-47s evacuating personnel from Suwon. Hudson held fire and continued the search pattern. At 3:17 hours, Fraser got a return at 6 kilometers moving south at low altitude. Hudson turned to intercept. Here's the tangent and it matters for understanding what happened next. The North Korean People's Air Force used Soviet radio protocols in 1950 because Soviet advisors were running their operations. The Korean word they used for radio discipline translates to mujontong, which means wireless communication, but the specific phraseology came from Russian tactical doctrine. When American signals intelligence intercepted North Korean radio traffic during June and July, they noted unusual patterns. Pilots would go silent mid-mission without explanation. Controllers would issue instructions that received no acknowledgement. The intelligence reports assumed equipment failures or undertrained crews. What actually happened was more interesting. Soviet advisors had taught North Korean pilots that radio silence was survival. American direction-finding equipment could track transmissions. Every radio call was a targeting beacon. The doctrine made sense against an enemy with sophisticated signals intelligence. Against an enemy with radar, it was useless. Staying off the radio didn't hide you from SCR-720 returns. But the North Korean pilots didn't know American night fighters had functional radar. Soviet advisors assumed the technology was too primitive for field use. They were wrong. Hudson closed to 3 kilometers before Fraser confirmed it was hostile. Single engine, propeller signature, heading 180 degrees at maybe 250 miles per hour. Hudson pushed the throttles forward, and the twin accelerated. The asymmetric thrust from the 2 engines pulling independently required constant rudder correction. Not difficult, just annoying. At 1 kilometer, Hudson got visual identification. Dark shape against darker sky. Straight wings. The silhouette matched a Yak-9 or possibly an La-7. Didn't matter which. He triggered the guns at 800 meters, 650s firing simultaneously. The tracers looked like orange lines connecting his aircraft to the target. 4-second burst. The North Korean aircraft pitched down hard and Hudson lost visual. Fraser called the radar return, dropping fast. Hudson followed. At 2,000 feet, he spotted fire. The aircraft had hit something. Ground or water. The explosion was small. Brief orange flash, then nothing. Fraser marked the position, and Hudson climbed back to patrol altitude. First confirmed kill of the war for an F-82. The time was 3:23 hours, 6 minutes from initial contact to impact. They stayed on station another 2 hours, no additional contacts. Landed back at Itazuka at 6:15 hours with 400 rounds expended and 1 claim filed. Night fighting in 1950 required solving problems that contradicted each other. You needed speed to catch targets, but low enough airspeed to actually see ground vehicles or identify aircraft visually before shooting. You needed altitude for radar range, but close enough to the ground that terrain masking didn't hide your target. You needed endurance for long patrols, but enough power for quick intercepts. Jets failed at most of this. The F-80 Shooting Star was too fast. Minimum controllable airspeed around 170 miles per hour, which meant pilots overflew targets before recognizing them. The aircraft burned 1,200 pounds of fuel per hour at cruise settings. Night patrol missions required 3 to 4 hours on station. The math didn't work. F-80s could fly combat air patrol in daylight or hit known targets at night with predetermined coordinates. They couldn't hunt. Propeller fighters had the opposite problem. The F-51 Mustang could fly slow enough for visual identification and had the range for extended missions, but it lacked radar and the pilot sat alone trying to manage navigation, target acquisition, and weapons employment simultaneously. Possible in daylight. Exhausting at night. Miss rate was terrible. The F-82 split the difference. 2 crew members divided the workload. The radar operator managed search and navigation, while the pilot focused on flying and shooting. Cruise speed 280 miles per hour with combat radius exceeding 500 miles. Fast enough to intercept most targets. Slow enough to identify them. The SCR-720 radar gave standoff detection capability that should have been decisive. Should have been. I've read the technical manuals and the after-action reports from June and July 1950, and the effectiveness claims don't always match the described conditions. The SCR-720 had a maximum detection range of 10 miles against bomber-sized targets under ideal circumstances. smaller aircraft at lower altitudes reduced that range significantly. Some reports claim F-82 crews were getting radar locks at 15 miles. Others describe crews relying entirely on visual acquisition because the radar returns were too cluttered with ground interference to distinguish aircraft. The conditions varied. Weather, terrain, target aspect, operator skill, everything affected performance. Saying the radar worked or didn't work oversimplifies. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. The crews adapted. What mattered was the combination. Radar gave you approximate location and bearing. Mark I eyeballs confirmed identification. 6 machine guns delivered enough firepower that you didn't need perfect accuracy. The F-82 wasn't elegant, but it was sufficient for the mission nobody else could fly. By early July, 5th Air Force had committed every available Twin Mustang to Korean operations. Aircraft that had been defending Alaska and the Pacific Northwest were flying combat missions over Pyongyang. The 68th Fighter Squadron got reinforcements from the 347th Fighter Wing, bringing total strength to maybe 20 operational F-82s. Still not enough for continuous coverage, but sufficient to make North Korean forces reconsider operating after dark. The jet advocates kept pushing for F-94 Starfires to replace the Twin. Better radar, faster intercept speeds, modern platform, didn't matter. The F-94 wouldn't arrive in Korea until 1951, and by then the air war had shifted. In summer 1950, the ugly propeller fighter nobody wanted was the only thing standing between North Korean air superiority at night and total chaos. Some details just don't survive. Nobody tracked which specific F-82 crews flew which patrol sectors on which nights. The mission logs exist, but the granular tactical decisions, why one crew engaged and another didn't, that level of detail wasn't recorded. North Korean ground controllers near Pyongyang logged an unusual contact at 3:19 hours on June 27th. The report, declassified by South Korean intelligence in 1997 after a document exchange with Russian archives, describes radar returns showing 2 distinct engine signatures flying in precise formation. The controller assumed it was 2 aircraft, American F-80s, maybe. The note includes the phrase paired approach pattern, which doesn't match typical fighter tactics. They were tracking one F-82. The twin engines and dual fuselages created a radar signature that confused operators trained on Soviet doctrine, expecting single-engine fighters or multi-engine bombers. Nothing in their identification procedures covered an aircraft that looked like 2 fighters welded together, because nothing like that existed in Soviet inventory. The controller vectored a Yak-9 south to investigate. Pilot's name isn't in the declassified document, just Combat Unit 5, Aircraft 17, which was standard North Korean notation for operational security. The Yak pilot acknowledged orders and turned south, climbing to 4,000 meters. His last transmission came at 3:21 hours, reporting visual contact with unidentified aircraft. Then silence. Soviet advisors at the command post waited for follow-up. The radio protocols they'd implemented required pilots to report engagement results immediately. No report came. At 3:28 hours, the controller tried raising aircraft 17. No response. At 3:35 hours, they declared the aircraft missing and logged probable combat loss to enemy action. The phrase they used was presumed destroyed by unknown forces, which is bureaucratic language for we don't know what happened. A North Korean pilot who defected in 1953, interviewed by American intelligence officers at Kimpo, described the confusion among crews during late June. Nobody understood how American aircraft were finding them at night. Soviet advisors insisted radio discipline would prevent interception. Stay off the radio, fly low, avoid predictable routes. The tactics worked against direction-finding equipment. They did nothing against radar the North Koreans didn't know existed. The defector claimed pilots developed superstitions. Some believed Americans had night vision capabilities. Others thought informants on the ground were radioing positions. One theory blamed experimental infrared detection systems. All wrong. The explanation was simpler. SCR-720 radar and competent operators. But The North Korean Air Force didn't have radar-equipped fighters in 1950, so they couldn't imagine the Americans did either. By early July, North Korean sortie rates after sunset dropped noticeably. 5th Air Force Intelligence noted the shift in pattern analysis reports. Fewer night supply runs. Reduced air activity between 0200 and 0500 hours specifically. The assessment concluded that North Korean forces were either taking unsustainable losses or had revised their tactical doctrine to avoid American night fighters. Probably both. The Soviet advisors recognized what was happening because they'd seen similar patterns in previous conflicts. Pilots who can't understand why they're dying stop volunteering for missions. Loss rates that exceed replacement rates create force-wide paralysis. By August, the North Korean People's Air Force had effectively ceded night operations entirely. They flew daytime missions only, and even those decreased as American air superiority became overwhelming. Hudson's kill on June 27th wasn't unique. It was representative. F-82 crews across the theater were achieving similar results. The North Koreans adapted by not flying. That's victory through attrition. Not glorious, effective. The declassified document ends with a note from the Soviet advisor requesting better radar training for Korean controllers and inquiry into American night fighting capabilities. Dated July 3, 1950. By then, it was too late. Hudson flew 3 more missions between June 27th and June 30th. Fraser stayed in the right cockpit for all of them. The second mission produced no contacts. The third ended with a claim on an Il-10 ground attack aircraft near Suwon that Hudson fired on but couldn't confirm destroyed. The gun camera footage showed hits, but the aircraft disappeared into cloud cover before impact. Probable kill. Maybe. The fourth mission on June 30th was different. Launch at 1:30 hours from Itazuki. Same search pattern northwest toward Kimpo. Weather was clearer than June 27th. Visibility maybe 5 miles at altitude. Fraser started getting intermittent radar returns at 2:15 hours. Multiple contacts. Hudson turned to investigate, and Fraser sorted them into at least 3 separate aircraft, flying loose formation, heading south. Range 4 kilometers. Soviet advisors were still teaching North Korean pilots formation discipline at this point. Maintain position. Stay visual with your wingmen. Don't separate. The doctrine worked in daylight. At night, it just made 3 aircraft easier to track than 1. Hudson closed to 2 kilometers before the radar returns scattered. The formation broke. Fraser tracked the nearest contact while Hudson pushed the throttles to military power. The F-82 accelerated sluggishly because of the drop tanks. Drag penalty. At 1 kilometer, Hudson saw them. 3 aircraft. Dark shapes against lighter sky. 1 broke left, 1 broke right. The third continued straight. Target fixation is what gets pilots killed. Hudson knew that. He ignored the 2 breaking away and focused on the 1 flying straight. Possibly the least experienced pilot. Possibly frozen. Possibly just unlucky. At 600 meters, Hudson fired. The tracers converged, and the target's left wing folded. The aircraft rolled inverted and dropped. Hudson didn't watch it hit. Fraser was already calling out the second contact. Hudson pulled hard left, and the Twin Mustang's handling characteristics became apparent. The aircraft didn't turn so much as slide sideways through the air. Roll rate was mediocre. Turn radius was terrible. But Hudson got the nose around, and Fraser held the radar lock. Second target was running, heading northeast back toward Pyongyang at full throttle. The chase lasted 4 minutes. Hudson closed the distance because the F-82 was faster in level flight than anything North Korea was flying. At 400 meters, he fired and missed. Tracers went wide right. He corrected and fired again. Second burst connected. The target pitched down, trailing fire, and Hudson broke off. Fraser marked the position. 2 confirmed. The third aircraft was gone. Disappeared. Fraser couldn't reacquire it on radar. Hudson circled the area for 20 minutes, searching visually. Nothing. The pilot had either escaped or crashed somewhere. Fraser wasn't looking. Hudson climbed back to patrol altitude and continued the mission. They landed at Itazuki at 0545 hours with 2 claims and half the ammunition gone. 5th Air Force confirmed both kills through intelligence reports and wreckage analysis near the crash sites. Hudson's total stood at 3. Fraser got credit for all 3 as radar operator. That's how crew kills worked. Both names on the paperwork. The 68th Fighter Squadron claimed 14 kills through July. Not all F-82 crews were as successful as Hudson and Fraser. Some flew dozens of missions without contacts. The night sky over Korea was big, and North Korean air activity was limited. Finding targets required luck and persistence. But when contact happened, the Twin Mustang did what jets couldn't. It stayed in the air long enough to hunt, and it carried enough firepower to kill what it found. Ugly, effective truck. 5th Air Force Headquarters at Nagoya received Hudson's mission report through standard channels on July 1st. The intelligence officer who processed it was Captain Somebody. The name's not in the declassified summary I found at Air Force Historical Research Agency. He noted the double kill claim and forwarded it to operations with a recommendation for immediate publicity. 2 kills in one mission made good press material. The Air Force needed positive stories because ground forces were retreating and newspapers were asking uncomfortable questions about American readiness. The paperwork routing gets interesting here and connects to nothing useful, but I spent time tracking it, so you're getting it. Hudson's report went from intelligence to operations to public affairs to Far East Air Force's command in Tokyo. Somewhere in that chain, someone added a note requesting verification through Korean language intercepts of North Korean radio traffic. That request went to a signals intelligence unit at Johnson Air Base. They confirmed North Korean controllers reported 2 aircraft missing on June 30th in the timeframe and location matching Hudson's claims. The verification memo got filed separately from Hudson's original report. Different filing system, different archive box. I found them 40 years apart in the same repository. Doesn't matter. The kills were confirmed either way. What mattered operationally was the immediate response. Far East Air Forces ordered accelerated deployment of additional F-82s from stateside units. The 347th Fighter Wing sent more crews. Air Defense Command in the continental United States stripped aircraft from interceptor squadrons defending Seattle and San Francisco. By mid-July, 5th Air Force had roughly 30 operational Twin Mustangs in theater. Still inadequate for continuous night coverage, but sufficient to establish patterns that North Korean forces learned to avoid. The jet advocates kept pushing for replacement. Lieutenant General George Stratemeyer, who commanded Far East Air Forces, wanted F-94s, modern all-weather interceptors with better radar and jet performance. The problem was availability. The F-94 was still working through development issues. Early production models had engine reliability problems, and the radar needed refinement. None would reach operational status in Korea until spring 1951. The Twin Mustang was obsolete, but it was present and functional. Strategic Air Command wanted the F-82s back. Night air defense of the United States was their primary mission, and Korea was pulling aircraft away from that role. The request went to the Joint Chiefs, who told SAC that Korea took priority. The Twin Mustang stayed. Hudson flew 11 more missions through August. No additional kills, plenty of patrol hours, long nights searching empty sky. Fraser rotated back to the United States in September. Hudson got a new radar operator whose name I cannot find in any accessible record. They flew together through October when the Chinese entered the war and everything changed. By November, the air threat shifted to MiG-15s operating from bases in Manchuria. Jets flying at altitudes and speeds the F-82 couldn't match. The Twin Mustangs mission converted from interception to ground attack. Night interdiction against supply convoys. Less glamorous, more dangerous because of ground fire. The aircraft wasn't designed for low-altitude bombing runs, but necessity changes doctrine. The 68th Fighter Squadron flew F-82s until January 1951 when they finally got jets. F-94s arrived at Kimpo and the Twin Mustangs went home or got scrapped. Most were scrapped. The airframes had accumulated too many hours, and the Air Force didn't want to pay for major overhauls on aircraft they were phasing out anyway. Hudson returned stateside in March 1951. He stayed in the Air Force and retired as a colonel in 1968. F-82 crews claimed 20 confirmed air-to-air kills during the Korean War. Most happened between June and September 1950, before jet interceptors arrived and before North Korean air activity collapsed entirely. The Twin Mustangs' combat record was brief and effective, and then immediately forgotten because propeller fighters don't fit the narrative of modern air warfare. The Air Force wanted stories about jets. F-80s shooting down MiG-15s, F-86 Sabres achieving kill ratios that proved American superiority. Those stories had public relations value. They justified procurement budgets and reinforced the doctrine that jets were the future. The F-82 was an embarrassing reminder that sometimes obsolete aircraft flown by competent crews outperformed expensive modern platforms that weren't ready yet. Hudson's 3 kills placed him in the middle of the squadron rankings. Major James Little claimed 5 flying F-82s, making him the only Twin Mustang ace. Lieutenant Charles Moran got 4. Several other pilots got 2 or 3. The numbers seem small compared to World War II or later Korea. Jet aces, but the context matters. Night intercept missions were rare opportunities. Most patrols produced no contacts. Finding and killing 3 enemy aircraft in darkness with 1950 radar technology was respectable work. The Air Force didn't promote these achievements aggressively. No widespread publicity, no newsreel coverage. Hudson received an Air Medal for his June 30th mission, standard decoration. Not a Distinguished Flying Cross, not a Silver Star. The bureaucracy recognized competent performance without celebrating it. Why the F-82's success disappeared from popular memory is straightforward. The aircraft stopped being useful almost immediately after proving its worth. By late 1950, the air war had moved to jet versus jet engagements at high altitude. The Twin Mustang couldn't participate. It became a ground attack platform, dropping bombs on trucks. That mission generated no dramatic stories, just dangerous, repetitive work that accumulated flight hours until the airframes wore out. The pilots who flew F-82s in Korea went on to other aircraft and other assignments. Some transitioned to F-86s and became jet aces. Some went to bombers or transports. Some left the service. Hudson stayed but never flew combat again. His 3 kills represented his total war record: brief, effective, forgotten. Historians writing about Korean air combat focus on Sabre versus MiG engagements because those fights determined air superiority and produced quantifiable results that support analysis. The F-82 interlude was too short and too limited in scope to warrant extended coverage. A few paragraphs in comprehensive histories, maybe a footnote in books about night fighting. The aircraft that saved American forces during the first desperate months gets treated as a transitional curiosity. The crews who flew them understood the reality. They had an aircraft that worked when nothing else could. They flew missions other platforms couldn't execute. They achieved results that mattered operationally, even if historians ignored them later. That's enough. Or maybe it's not enough, and the absence of recognition bothers some of the surviving crew members. I don't know. Most are dead now. The ones who gave interviews before they died generally focused on specific missions or technical details. Nobody complained about lack of recognition. Fighter pilots don't usually complain about that publicly. But the F-82's contribution to Korean air operations deserved better than footnote status. James Little died in 2003. Charles Moran died in 1988. The other F-82 pilots are mostly gone too. Their aircraft disappeared faster, scrapped or abandoned. Only a handful survived, including Hudson's, tail number 46-383, dark blue paint with weathering. Twin fuselages connected by center wing section. 1 red star painted under the left cockpit canopy. 3 more on the right. Hudson's kills plus Fraser's credit. The aircraft sits in the Korean War exhibit at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. I stood in front of it in 2019. The museum lighting makes photography difficult. Overhead fluorescents wash out details and create glare on the plexiglass canopy. The placard next to the aircraft mentions Lieutenant Hudson and the June 27th kill. First air-to-air victory of the Korean War. The placard doesn't mention Fraser. Doesn't mention the June 30th double kill. Space limitations, probably. Or maybe the curator focused on the first kill narrative because that's simpler. The aircraft looks smaller than the specifications suggest. Wingspan 51 feet, length 42 feet for each fuselage. On the museum floor, surrounded by larger aircraft, it seems almost delicate. The twin arrangement that looked ungainly in photographs makes visual sense in person. Two complete fighters sharing a wing, practical solution to a specific problem. The gun ports in the center wing are empty. No weapons. The SCR-720 radar housing under the nose is intact, but the internal components were removed decades ago. What remains is the airframe, metal and rivets and faded paint. The physical object that carried Hudson and Fraser through darkness. Over Korea in 1950. Bureau number 46-383 was manufactured in 1946 at North American Aviation's facility in Inglewood, California. Delivered to the Air Force in March 1947. Assigned to Air Defense Command. Sent to the 68th Fighter Squadron in Japan sometime in 1949. Flew combat missions from June through December 1950. Returned to the United States in early 1951 when the squadron converted to jets. Placed in storage at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. Most F-82s in storage got scrapped. The Air Force didn't see preservation value in obsolete propeller fighters when hangar space was limited and jet programs needed funding. But 46-383 had the first kill distinction. Someone decided that mattered enough to save it. The aircraft went to the Air Force Museum in 1957. Restored in 1960 with accurate markings from its Korean service, displayed continuously since then. It's just metal now. An artifact representing decisions made 75 years ago about what kind of aircraft might be useful and how quickly those decisions became irrelevant. The F-82 was designed for a war that didn't happen, escorting B-29s deep into Soviet territory. It proved essential for a war nobody predicted. Flying night intercepts over Korea against propeller aircraft using tactics from the previous decade. Hudson never saw the aircraft after 1951. He knew it was in the museum. Friends told him. He never visited. I don't know why. Maybe returning to see the aircraft that carried him through combat seemed unnecessary. Maybe he preferred remembering it as a functional machine rather than a museum piece. Maybe he just didn't care that much. The placard includes his